Because this 101, you can see that this 101 is having the OSI model, the F5 solutions and technology, load balancing essentials, and then security. So in total, we have these 4 sections available when it comes to, and section 5 is also there, right? Application delivery platforms. So as I said, like you have the virtual edition, the hardware. Under hardware, again, you have like appliances, and then also you have chassis, right? So this is what you will discuss over there. So first OSI model, and then solution and technology, and then load balancing essentials, and then security, and finally application delivery platform. So let's go through it quickly. So that's your OSI model. I don't have to explain much, right? Because what I believe that you are already aware with that. So in OSI model, you can see that it's a reference model which really helps us to perform troubleshooting or to understand any technology, right? Because based on the OSI model only, based on OSI model only, we says that hey, this protocol works at this layer or that layer, right? This device works at this layer. Like sometimes we call layer 4 firewall, sometimes we call layer 7 firewalls, right? So like that. So to understand those terminologies or to understand the function of the devices, those type of devices, it is pretty important for us to understand this OSI model. Like I hope that you are already aware that even big IP load balancer, right? F5 load balancers are also known as layer 7 devices because these devices can even perform load balancing at layer 7, right? So that's what I wanted to make you understand. So you can see physical layer, data link layer, network layer, transport layer, session layer, presentation, and finally it's application layer, right? No, even for a single application, you can do that based on the sessions, the HTTP sessions. Okay. So HTTP is a layer 7 protocol, right? So based on HTTP sessions, that how many sessions one server is having, HTTP sessions, it can perform load sharing. Okay. Yeah. And also you can say that, okay, I have 10 servers. I want to use only 3 servers for FTP and 4 servers for web. So this is also you can do that you stated before. Okay. That is also possible. So within this OSI model, you can see that we have in total 7 layers, like layer 1 to layer 4, and then layer 5 to layer 7. So layer 5 to layer 7 known as upper layers, and from layer 1 to layer 4, it's known as transport service. So which comes from physical layer up to transport layer. So that's that. So application layer, I don't have to explain much, right? I hope that you are already aware that what's the role of application layer and how many protocol works at application layer. And mostly you will see that most of the protocols works at application layer, such as FTP, HTTP, HTTPS, FTPS, SFTP, SSH, Telnet, right? SMTP, SNMP, NTP, right? And so on, right? So there are so many protocols works at application layer of OSI model. So mainly application protocols are responsible to provide you services, right? So you have certain types of services such as web services, data transfer services, voice services, video services. And for each service, we have different application layer protocol. Like for voice, ideally you would have like RTP and so forth, right? So then presentation layer is there, which is responsible to represent your data maybe in encrypted format, in plain text format, the compressed format, like that. Session layer is responsible to establish the sessions. Maybe um, you can take an example of SSL session, right? So that comes under session layer. Transport layer, mainly you will provide the transportation to your actual data. So when it comes to the transportation, it is either connection oriented or connectionless. So you can provide either connectionless transport or connection oriented transport. So when it comes to the connection oriented transport, Then connection-oriented transport will be, connection-oriented transport will be provided by the TCP, whereas connectionless transport will be provided by the UDP. So UDP is a connectionless protocol, whereas TCP is a connection-oriented protocol. So when I say connection-oriented, which means that first it will perform three-way handshaking, and post that only the sender will be able to send the data. So first sender has to perform three-way handshaking. Once three-way handshaking is completed, then only sender will be able to send data. Same goes with UDP, right? So UDP is just user datagram protocol, and when it comes to the UDP, it's a connectionless protocol, and there is nothing like three-way handshaking. So if sender wants to send data using UDP, it can directly send the data without doing any kind of handshaking or without waiting for any other type of connection to be established. So we have a lot of differences between TCP and UDP, and that's where we should focus more. So I'm going to explain you the differences in more and more details between UDP and TCP. And then thereafter, you have network layer where in most cases you would talk about IPv4 and IPv6, right? So you would talk about IPv4 and IPv6 in most cases at network layer. But IPv4 and IPv6 are not the only protocol works at network layer. Other than that, you have ICMP, you have IGMP, you have OSPF, right? So you have so many protocols works at network layer itself, right? But yes, IPv4 and IPv6, these two are major. These two are the major protocols works at network layer. So you know very well that network layer is basically mainly responsible for logical addressing. So where IP addressing comes into the picture, right? So you would perform IP addressing for your data at network layer. So data link layer is also known as layer 2, right? So data link layer, and that depends on technology to technology that which header or which layer 2 header will be added on top of your data. So if you are using Ethernet technology, that at layer 2 you're gonna utilize Ethernet header. If you have probably frame relay, then at layer 2 it will add the frame relay header. If it's PPP, then it will add PPP header. So that all depends that which technology you are utilizing at data link layer. Thereafter, we have physical layer. So physical layer is nothing, just a physical connection, right? So maybe Cat5, Cat6, that comes under physical layer, maybe fiber optic like that, okay? So if you talk about the layer 7, right? So at layer 7, which is also known as application layer, right? So you can see that this layer supports application and the user process, right? So basically, end user is gonna interact with data at application layer itself, right? So this is also what you can study here, right? Like end user layers. I mean, this application layer is also known as end user layer, right? So you would always have a program at layer 7, which will help end user to read your data, okay? And presentation layer is also known as syntax layer, and then session layer, sync and send to port. I mean, sometimes the definition may be incorrect, right? Sometimes, but not every time. Transport, you can see TCP or UDP. Network IPv4 or IPv6. Ideally, routers will work at a network layer, right? Because routers does routing, and routing is always done based on IPv4 header, like based on destination IPs, whether it's IPv4 address or it's IPv6 address. Gateway is the device that works at all 7 layers, right? And at same time, you can also look at the DoD4 model, right? Which basically which was utilized to announce TCP/IP model, right, Arjun? So TCP/IP model came from DoD model. You can see in DoD model you have only 4 layers like process, which combines application, presentation, and session layer under OSI model, and host-to-host layer, which is a transport layer in OSI model, internet, which is network layer in OSI model, and the network layer, which is a combination of data link layer and physical layer in OSI model. So that really helped to come up with the TCP/IP model. So nowadays, even if you are assigning an IP address to your machine, right, guys? So for example, if you say ncpa.cpl, and if you are assigning an IP address to your machine, you don't get an option of OSI model. So you have TCP/IP v4 or maybe TCP/IP v6, right? You are using either IPv4 or IPv6. Okay. All right. So that's that. And thereafter, give me 1 sec, please. Okay, I'm back, guys. So this is what I explained to you. So again, you can look at there, right? And then you can see that they are describing something related to the different layers of the OSI model. So at physical layer, mainly you have hubs, repeaters, cables, optical fiber cables, phonats, STM, coaxial cable, twisted pair cable, connectors, like that. So all those components comes under physical layer, right, guys? Then you have data link layer, right? So if you talk about the data link layer, you can see that data link layer, if we particularly we talk about the Ethernet switching, then you would always have the forwarding database available on your switches, especially on Ethernet switches, which is also known as Ethernet switching table, or also known as MAC address table, also known as CAM table, right? So Ethernet switches will always forward your data, will always forward your frames based on MAC addresses, okay? Based on MAC addresses. Any questions? Right. So when I say how it works, so you must remember the function of the Ethernet switch. So if you remember the function of the Ethernet switch, it is like when a Ethernet switch receives a frame, it opens up the Ethernet header. Inside Ethernet header, it will get the source MAC address and destination MAC address. So for source MAC address, it will create an entry in its MAC address table, and for destination MAC address, it will perform lookup in its MAC table. If destination MAC address is available in MAC table, it will perform unicasting. If destination MAC address is not available in MAC address table, it will perform flooding. So that's how it works. At same time, you should know the process of the ARP, address resolution protocol, right? ARP, which is again, I mean, ARP is also considered a layer 2 protocol. It also works at data link layer. But sometimes you would see that in few books, right, it has been stated that ARP works at network layer. However, technically it's not. Because if it was a layer 3 protocol, then it must have utilized IP header. It must have added IP header on top of ARP packet. However, if you are aware, like if you have heard about this protocol before, then you must have read that ARP packets, ARP messages are not encapsulated by IP. No IP header is added on top of ARP. And that's why I don't call it layer 3 protocol, because if it is a layer 3 protocol, then it must have handed over its payload to the IPv4 or IPv6. And further, either IPv4 or IPv6 must have added its header on top of ARP. But it does not happen, right? And that is why technically it is a layer 2 protocol. And the main purpose of ARP protocol, which is also known as address resolution protocol, is to identify or is to calculate um, destination MAC address by the help of IP address. Let's say you have destination IP address, but you do not have the destination MAC address, and you know very well based on the OSI model, you cannot place your data onto physical media unless you follow the OSI model. And as per the OSI model, it is mandatory for us to add the Ethernet header on top of the IP packet, right? So without having Ethernet header, it is not possible for you to place your data onto physical media. And to add Ethernet header, it is mandatory to have source and destination MAC addresses. So in most cases, you would always have the source MAC address, but let's say you don't have the destination MAC address. So in case if you don't have the destination MAC address and you want to identify or you want to get the destination MAC address against an IP address, like you are already aware with the IP address and what is the destination IP, right? But you are not aware with the MAC address. So ARP will help you to get a MAC address against destination IP address, right? By sending out ARP request and ARP reply. So ARP address resolution protocol, it's a layer 2 protocol which has different types of messages such as ARP request, ARP reply. Okay. Does that make sense to all of you, Arjun? Are you aware with the ARP process? Great. So ARP request is always sent by the end user machine, which has Ethernet interface and IP address configured on that interface. So it's not that layer 2 switches will have the ARP table that's mandatory for them. It's not necessary. It's not necessary for all devices to maintain ARP table. To maintain ARP table, it is necessary to have at least one Ethernet interface and IP address configured on top of that. Okay. So if you have Ethernet interface available on your machine, on your device, it must also have an IP address. It has both conditions, right? If it has both conditions meeting, if both of the conditions are matching, then it will generate ARP table, right? And in its own ARP table, it will have its own MAC address and IP address, right? In case if your machine, if your device doesn't have destination MAC address in its ARP table, right? Then it will generate ARP request. And ARP request is always broadcasted, whereas ARP reply is always unicasted. Any questions so far? Okay. So MAC address is a 48 bits long MAC address, out of which 24 bits are also known as OUI, organizational unique identifier, and remaining 24 bits are known as vendor assigned, like vendor ID. Okay. Then you should be knowing about the broadcast domain. That what is broadcast domain? So one VLAN is equal to one broadcast domain. One VLAN is equal to one broadcast domain. So if you really wanna break your broadcast domain into multiple broadcast domains, then you should use VLANs. Okay, you should use VLANs to break your larger broadcast domain into smaller broadcast domains. Okay. Any questions? All right. So VLANs you can utilize to break your broadcast domain. And broadcast domain is a collection of devices where if any one of the device send a broadcast message, then all others are going to receive a copy of that. I hope that you are aware with the definition of broadcast domain, right? And VLAN, you know very well that we can utilize VLANs to break the broadcast domain. So are VLAN required? Of course, VLANs are required to break larger broadcast domains into smaller broadcast domains. But that's not the only reason, or that's not the only requirement of having VLANs in place. Even you can have VLANs if you have more than 200, if you have more than 200 devices in your local area network, right? So if you have more than 200 devices in your local area network, then it is better to use VLAN. Next, if you have a lot of broadcast traffic in your VLAN, in your local area network, then you should divide that lane into multiple VLANs, okay? If you, if you have a group of users, right? If you have a group of users which really want to have tight security, which really wants to put themselves into isolation, like they want their network completely isolated from others, then you can create a dedicated VLAN for that group of users, right? And you know very well that by default, any type of data, be it is unicasted, multicasted, or broadcasted, cannot move from one VLAN to another VLAN. Okay. So that's that piece. And VLAN, basically one VLAN is equal to one virtual switch. So let's say you have a physical switch and you want to divide your physical switch into multiple virtual switches, which means that you can go ahead and create multiple VLANs. So one VLAN is also known as, like, one VLAN is equal to one virtual switch. That's it. Any questions? All right. So, and sometimes in an interview, people might ask you one question. Hey, you also have subnetting, which you can perform. So why don't you do just subnet instead of creating VLANs? So you will simply tell them that, hey, if we are just doing subnetting, so that can help us to break larger broadcast domain at layer 3 only, not at layer 2. So if we really want to break a larger broadcast domain into smaller broadcast domains at layer 2, then it can be done by VLANs only. Okay. Then how can devices on different VLANs communicate? That is also the question that you might have heard, right? That is there any way to perform, or is there any way to enable connectivity between the users part of different VLANs? Yes, it is possible by doing inter-VLAN routing. So yes, we can perform inter-VLAN routing if we really want to enable connectivity between different VLANs. Okay, so then you can perform inter-VLAN routing. Trunk port, you know very well that why trunk port is needed. So you must remember that between switches, we must always have a trunk port between switches, so that the traffic, the data from multiple VLANs can be allowed over that trunk port. Okay, so trunk port is really needed between the switches, so that you should always remember. Okay, in similar way, you can also configure trunking on your big IP, right? So big IP does support for trunking. What do VLANs offer? So as I said, that VLANs will help you to limit your broadcast domains. Okay, to reduce the size of the broadcast domains and to limit the broadcasts. Okay, link aggregation is also supported, and it is also known as Ether channel. So in Cisco, you call it Ether channel. In Big IP, I call it link aggregation. So this link aggregation is also supported by Big IP. Only LACP is the protocol which is supported by link aggregation protocol in Big IP. So Big IP does support only for LACP. Big IP does not support either static Ether channel or PHEP. It supports only LACP. So I hope that you are aware with the aggregation, link aggregation. So like it is also known as Ether channel. So at the end of Big IP, you can bundle multiple physical links together into a single logical link. So that's between Big IP and switch. Okay. So LACP is the only Ether channel, is the 4th channel aggregation protocol which is supported by Big IP. So that's LACP only. How LACP works, I hope that you are aware with that. Now they are talking about the network layer. So until now we have discussed like what is Ether channel, what is VLAN, what is broadcast domain, how do we break the broadcast domain, okay, and what is MAC address, how does ARP works, right? So I see that Rahul has also joined. So Rahul, Arjun, and Jagdish, we are going to continue this batch in weekends only. We will not. I was mistaken actually. The batch that is going to start from Monday is for SD-WAN technology, not for F5. Okay.
Okay.
So now it's network layer. So at network layer, the first point that you should always talk about is the IP addressing. Okay. Of course, you must be knowing or you must be aware with the IP addressing, because if you are not, if you really don't understand the IP addressing, then of course you always gonna have trouble in future. Okay, you will be in trouble for sure. So IP addresses, right? So IP addresses are 32 bits long addresses when it comes to the IPv4, and IPv6 addresses are 128 bits long addresses. I believe that you are aware with that. Okay. IPv4 addresses are 32 bits long addresses, whereas IPv6 addresses are 128 bits long MAC addresses. So in IPv4, you have 32 bits, 32 bits, okay, in total. Just a sec, please. Get me 1 sec, please. I'm getting a call. Hello? आगे रहो. अच्छा, अरे बबलू, बबलू, 1 second, guys. हाँ, एक second hold. All right, guys, I'm back. Sorry. So, Arjun, as I said, IPv4 works I mean, IP addressing is done at network layer, right? So you must understand the IP addressing, right? So I hope that you remember that IP addresses are 32 bits long addresses, and same goes with the subnet mask, right? And so forth. You have classes, class A, class B, class C, class D, and class E. We can assign IP addresses to our machines, to our end users from class A, B, or C only. Class D is reserved for the multicast routing, and class E is reserved for experimental, right? And that's only for the United States government, not for anybody else. Okay. So we can have an IP addresses from class A, B, and C only, right? So that's that piece. Same goes with the subnet mask. So we have some default subnet mask values for class A IPs, and we also have some default subnet mask values for class B IP addresses. Same goes with class C. So for class A, the default subnet mask is 255.0.0.0. For class B, it's 255.255.0.0. For class C, it's 255.255.255.0. Okay. So these are the default subnet mask values for the IP addresses, right? So if you have an IP address from class A, then the default subnet mask would be 255.0.0.0, right? However, you can change, you can modify the subnet mask at any point of time wherever it's needed. Okay, like you do subnetting, right? So in subnetting, you break larger subnets into smaller subnets, right? That's what you do. So this is an example of your VLSM. This is an example of FLSM, fixed length subnet masking, because you can see that each and every subnet is having the common subnet mask. Like each network is having same number of IP addresses. You can see that. So the block size is of 32. So each block is having a same number of IPs. Okay. So this type of subnetting is known as FLSM, fixed length subnet masking. But also you can have VLSM, variable length subnet masking, where you can have different subnet masks for different subnets. Okay. In production nowadays, we prefer to use VLSM only, and in most cases, all of the routing protocols are are designed to support routing for VLSM and FLSM both. Okay. So you know very well that layer 3 devices are responsible to build routing table, and in routing table, devices will always have a route to destination IP. Okay. So whenever a layer 3 device will receive an IP packet, like for an example, it's a router, right? So router received an IP packet. So post receiving an IP packet, router is going to learn its destination IP address and will perform lookup in its routing table. Now there could be two conditions only. There could be only two different conditions. One, either it would have destination IP in its routing table, or it would not have that. If it has destination IP part of routing table, it will perform, it will forward that packet accordingly. If destination IP is not available in routing table, then it will simply discard the packet. That's the route table. That's necessary, right? In routing table, you can have, you would have like destination prefixes, gateways, the exit interface, and of course the MAC tree. Okay. Then to perform routing, we have two different methods to perform routing, like kind of static routing or dynamic routing. Okay. We don't usually prefer static routing, but since big IP is not a routing device, it's not a router, so it's better to add the static route, same as firewalls. Like over firewalls, we do not really prefer to implement dynamic routing protocols. Same goes with big IP. It's not preferred to configure dynamic routing protocols, but it's better to configure the static routing. But ultimately, routes will get installed in routing table. That's how you can get that. When it comes to the routing protocols, then you have various different routing protocols available in market, such as RIP, Routing Information Protocol, IGRP, Interior Gateway Routing Protocol, EIGRP, Enhanced Interior Gateway Routing Protocol, OSPF, ISIS, or maybe BGP, that's Border Gateway Protocol. Any questions? All right. So advantage of dynamic routing protocol is, that devices can exchange their routes information with each other dynamically. And fragmentation is also done at layer 3 if needed. Remember fragmentation, like your IP packets might get fragmented. Okay, like whenever your IP packet will exceed the MTU size, now there will be only two chances, or there will be two results. Either your packet will get discarded or it will get fragmented and then will be sent out. Okay, in case if MTU size is exceed, if the size of the IP packet is exceeding the MTU size of egress interface. And remember, fragmentation occurs only on egress interface, only on egress interfaces. And reassembling, then reassembling is done not by the next hop. Remember, reassembling will be done by the end user itself. So wherever packets will get delivered, only that machine will be responsible to perform reassembling. It's not next hop. It's not next hop which will be responsible to perform okay. So if you have any issues, please let me know. So let me know if you have any questions until now. So fragmentation will be occur only on egress interfaces, and it ideally occurs when the total packet length is exceeding the MPU size of the egress interface, right? But sometimes your packet will come to your router with the DF bit, with DF bit. So DF stands for like don't fragment. So if your router received a packet with DF bit, and if now, if now, if your IP packet length is exceeding the MPU size of the egress interface, definitely your packet is getting, is going to be dropped. Okay, because you disabled the fragmentation for that packet. You said DF bit. You said DF bit, don't fragment. But the total length of the IP packet is exceeding the size of the MPU on the egress interface, and you cannot perform fragmentation. So the solution is to drop that packet. Okay. And as I said, reassembling is done by the end machine only, like end user, whoever is going to receive the data, right? So that's how it does the fragmentation. Okay. So let's say you have a packet, right? And that packet was for 110 bytes. And let's say the MPU size of the egress interface is 40 bytes. So that's how it will get fragmented into 5 different packets. Of course, there will be some overhead due to fragmentation, and that is why it is always recommended to avoid fragmentation. That is why it is always recommended to avoid fragmentation. Like fragmentation should not occur. You should always try to build your network. You should always try to design your network in such a way so fragmentation would not occur in your network. Okay. But in case if a fragmentation took place in your network, definitely it is gonna increase the latency, right? It will increase the overhead, of course, right? The overall performance of the network will be degraded. Okay. TTL is also concept of the IP header and also the concept of network layer. So this TTL field within IP header really helps to protect our topology, our network from indefinite routing loops. Indefinite routing loops. That's that. Any questions?
No, sir.
All right. So remember that TTL is always decremented by, is always decremented by 1 by all layer 3 devices. So whenever an IP packet will traverse a layer 3 device, so when I say layer 3 device, which also includes like routers, layer 3 switches, if your packet was forwarded by looking its routing table, right? So if your device is doing layer 3 switching, then it will always decrement its TTL value inside IP header, right? So every layer 3 device will decrement the TTL value of the IP header by 1. So in case if there is a routing loop and packet is revolving inside your network, so at one stage the TTL value will become 0. And as soon as TTL becomes 0, your packet will get discarded. Okay, your packet will get discarded. Any questions so far? All right, great. So that's that piece. TTL is done. And then packet traversing a topology, like this is the topology where they are trying to explain you that how packet will get traversed, right? So you would see that MAC address will always get modified upon crossing each and every broadcast domain. So you can see there is a host A, which is a source host, destination host B, then switch and then router, then switch and then router, then switch and then router. So how many different broadcast domains you have in this topology? So broadcast domain 1 between host A and router A, then broadcast domain 2 between router A and B, broadcast domain number 3 between router B and C, and broadcast domain number 4 between router C and host B. So in total, there are 4 different broadcast domains. So if host A is sending data to host B, remember that source and destination MAC addresses will always get changed upon crossing each and every layer 3 hop. So whenever an IP packet will cross its broadcast domain, the source MAC and destination MAC will always get modified. You can see source MAC, destination MAC is always getting modified. But source IP and destination IP addresses will always remain same unless NAT is in place. Okay. So if NAT is in place, NAT, when I say NAT, it's network address translation. Okay. So if NAT, network address translation, is in place, then of course, source and destination IPs might also get changed. That's quite possible, right, Arjun? So if there is NAT, network address translation, then inside IP header, even IP addresses might get changed. Okay. But of course, like MAC addresses will always get modified whenever your packet will cross a broadcast domain. And IPv6 is there. It's not in exam as per this, but I believe that now they have added it. Recently, they have added IPv6 as well in their examination. Okay. So multicast routing, anycast, is all there, right? And then MTU, you know very well that what is MTU, maximum transfer unit, which is by default 1500 bytes onto most of the vendor specific devices. Whether you buy a layer 3 switch or router or firewall, in most cases, the default MTU size is 1500 bytes. So if you have any questions around MTU, please do let me know. Okay. So MTU and of course MSS, maximum segment size. And this MSS terminology is used by TCP at transport layer itself. Okay. So when it comes to the MSS, get me one sec, please, guys. Hold down for a moment, right? हेलो, आई एम बैक बॉस। एक्चुअली एक स्टूडेंट आ गए थे तो उनको एंटरटेन करना पड़ा, अभी कोई था नहीं ऑफिस में, इसलिए। हाँ, तो मैं बात कर रहा था यहाँ पे एमटीयू और एमएसएस की। तो आई वाज सेइंग कि the MSS this terminology like maximum segment size is applicable for TCP, right? So that is why they have started here transport layer, and when they started with the transport layer, they have also spoken about the MSS, right? Maximum segment size. And ideally, it is 1460 bytes. 1460. Like MDU is 1500, but your MSS is by default is set to 1460 bytes. Okay. Remember, MSS must always be lower than MTU. Even if it is equal to MTU, then again fragmentation will take place. Okay. So by default, MSS is 1460, MTU is 1500, right? And MSS maximum segment size. So ideally, this MSS maximum segment size defined or this MSS is applicable for TCP. So whenever TCP will send data, will send payloads, it will always send payloads in the form of segments. And the size of the segment will be maximum 1460. So that's TCP and MSS, right? So now again, you can talk about the TCP, like it establishes connections before sending data. That's the rule for TCP. If the connection was not established successfully, then it's not possible for TCP to send data, right? And then full duplex operations, okay? Error checking, sequencing, acknowledgement, flow control, packet recovery services. All these features are supported by TCP. Okay, and then three-way handshaking is always done, right? UDP does not perform any kind of three-way handshake. It does not provide you any acknowledgement, any reliability, any security, nothing like that. However, UDP provides you services with higher speed than TCP, right? And at same time, you should be aware with the port numbers utilized by the TCP and UDP, right? TCP does retransmissions, but UDP does not support retransmission. Port numbers, you should be aware that for each and every application layer protocol, we have a specific port number, right? And when it comes to the port number, these are again logical port numbers, and port numbers port numbers are allocated to your protocol in between 0 to 65535, out of which you have a non-series, then you have your like well-known port numbers are from 0 to 1023, and then you have your registered port numbers, which are from 10242 to 49151. Then you have private port numbers, which are from 491522 to 65535. So this is how your port numbers are categorized into multiple categories: well-known, registered, private port number. Private port number is like equal to private IP. Well-known port numbers are basically allocated only for well-known services, right? And well-known services are those services which are supported by all of the vendors. Like for example, HTTP. Now HTTP is supported by Microsoft, is supported by Google, by Apple, by Linux, by everyone. Android, everyone supports HTTP. So that's why for HTTP we have a well-known port number which is port 80. And for HTTPS, we have a well-known port number 443. So if you have a well-known service, then for well-known services, you would always have well-known port numbers. Registered port numbers are allocated for vendor-specific services, like Oracle has its own service, right? And Oracle wants to have a registered port number, a unique port number for its own service. It will have to purchase, like Oracle will have to purchase that port number from RIR, Regional Internet Registries. Maybe indirectly RIR will get them from INR. Okay. So that's how it works. So registered port numbers are registered for vendor specific services, and private port numbers anyone can use them. Anyone can utilize private port numbers. Okay. Then TCP timeout and retransmissions you can look at, right? So timeout is like our retransmission timeout. RTO is always defined. Like for example, if you have performed three-way handshaking and post doing three-way handshaking, now you have sent another segment to your destination host, right? You have sent another segment. I mean, you have sent the data. You have sent data to your destination host. Then you must receive an acknowledgement back. Now, if you do not receive an acknowledgement for transmitted data, then there should be some timer specified, um, you know, for doing wait for an acknowledgement. Okay, there should be some specified timers, and that timer is also known as RTO, retransmission timeout. So if sender is sending any segment using TCP, right, it will create a timestamp that hey, I sent this data at this time, and RTO is, let's say, 900 milliseconds. So if I do not get an acknowledgement back within 900 milliseconds, I will retransmit the same data. So if your RTO, which is also known as retransmission timeout, get expired, then data will get retransmitted. So this retransmission is supported by TCP only. Remember, retransmission is not supported by UDP because UDP does not provide you any kind of acknowledgement. So if you have any questions so far, please go ahead and let me know. All right. So remember that you will have to understand these TCP operations and UDP operations in much more details than I'm explaining here. Arjun, you have to work a lot on this stuff, right? So let me just take you through the header content, okay? So if I say TCP header format, you should see Wikipedia page, and then you should see the content of the TCP header. Now you must be aware with each and everything within the TCP header, right? So if you look at here, source port, destination port, sequence number, acknowledgement number, that's the TCP header. Data offset, result, NSGWR, EC, urgent, acknowledgement, push, reset, send, fin, window size, checksum, and then urgent pointer. So these all fields are available within the TCP header. Within TCP header. Any questions? Okay.
सर टीसीपी फ्लैग्स बताएंगे एक बारी क्या क्या काम होता है इनका जो
नहीं बिल्कुल भी एक्सप्लेन नहीं करूंगा. आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू एक्सप्लेन इट टू यू. फर्स्ट यू रीड इट बाय योर ओन एंड देन आई कैन एक्सप्लेन इट टू यू.
Okay.
Right. So Arjun, you please go ahead go ahead and read about all these TCP flags. Okay. Like you have seen, you have reset, push, ACK, urgent, EC, CWR, NS. And Rahul, I explained it before, remember? I covered it before in your batch itself. The same goes with UDP header. So first you read it by your own and try to understand each and every field by your own. Okay. That's all about the basics, right, of networking. Same goes with IP header. So if you go to IPv4 header and then if you check the content of the IPv4 header, it will give you a lot of idea that how does it really work. So you can see inside the IP header, we have this whole information. Version, internet header length, and then this is for quality of service, combining together the ACP and ECN, and then total length, identification number, flags, fragment offset, TTL, protocol fit, header checksum, source IP, destination IP. So you should be aware with each and everything when it comes to the header, right? Same goes with Ethernet header. So if I go back and if I open up like Ethernet header, you go to Ethernet, read whatever you can about the Ethernet. And also, do not forget to read about the Ethernet header as well. Okay? So that's about the Ethernet, and thereafter, you can also search for the Ethernet header. So if you search for Ethernet header format, again should be Wikipedia, and here you go. This is your Ethernet frame. So it contains your payload, and then payload is encapsulated by Ethernet header and trailer, right? So this is your trailer, which is FCS, also known as CRC, and then you have source MAC, destination MAC, and like that. The Ethernet header. This is layer 2 Ethernet frame. Layer 2 Ethernet frame will contain this whole information, and layer 1 frame will contain this whole information, including preamble and interpacket gap. The interpacket gap must be of 12 octets, which means 12 bytes. So the minimum gap between two packets would be of 12 bytes. Okay. The minimum size of Ethernet frame can be 64 bytes. The minimum size of layer 1 frame can be 72 bytes and maximum 1530. And at layer 2 maximum it can be 1522. And layer 3, at layer 3, as I said, the minimum size of the packet can be 46 bytes and the maximum can be 1500, because by default your MTU size is 1500. That's why. So when it comes to the frame, it's a layer 2 Ethernet frame, and also it is known as layer 1 Ethernet packet. Okay. So layer 2 carries only destination MAC, source MAC, ether type, and FCS. And this .1Q tag is optional. So this .1Q tag, this field is utilized only if you are sending your data out from the trunk port. Remember, between switches you do trunking. You have trunk encapsulation protocol, which is also .1Q. So if you are using .1Q tagging protocol, then this .1Q will be responsible to perform tagging, right? So when it comes to the layer 2 Ethernet frame, the minimum size of layer 2 Ethernet frame will be 64 bytes. The maximum will be 1522. That you should always keep in your mind. So this whole stuff you have to read. This whole stuff. You must be very, very aggressive, or you must be very comfortable with all with this whole stuff. Okay, like TCP header, the IP header, the UDP header, the ARP. So if you look at the ARP packet, so it has this whole information. You can also capture your packet using Wireshark, and then you can look at there. Okay, so that's that piece. And similarly, you can also look at the ICMP. So this is ICMP packet, and you can read a lot of things about the ICMP here. Okay, that's that, like call type, checksum, like that. Okay, so ICMP echo request. So you should be aware with each and everything, right? So echo reply is type 0, right? And destination reachable is type 3 packet within ICMP. Then 8 type 8 is for echo request. All right. So we have different types of requests, and for those different types of requests, we have different types of, we have different types within ICMP. Okay. Then codes are also there. So if your destination is unreachable, like you are getting unreachable messages, inside unreachable messages, now you will get a code. So if you get a code of 5, which means source route failed. If you got code 7, which means destination host is unknown. Okay. If code was 2, then destination protocol is unreachable. With maybe somebody blocked using ACL. So we should be aware with everything here. Same goes with HTTP. So if I look at the HTTP, so we must be aware with this HTTP, especially in F5, in big IP, you will focus more over application layer protocols. Like in routing, like when you learn routing and that whole stuff, you ideally, focus more over IP, over network layer and transport layer only. But when it comes to the F5 technology, the big IP, right, then you should focus over application layer protocols like HTTP. We should be knowing about the HTTP. We should be knowing about the HTTP methods, like versions, right? So you can see HTTP version 0.9, it got started with 0.9, 1.0, 1.1, 2.0. Even in 2018, they have came up with 3.0 as well, but 3.0 is still not been rolled out in production environment yet. So this HTTP 3.0 has not been rolled out. Currently, we are using HTTP 2.0 only. Okay. HTTP sessions, persistent connections, session rate, authentication, right? Request methods. So when you talk about the request methods, then HTTP can use get, head, post, put, delete, trace, options, connect, patch. These all are request methods. Okay. Then you have responses and then response codes as well. These all are methods. Okay. Get, head, post, put, like that. Thereafter, response messages, and then you have response codes. So if you have a response code starting with 1, which means it has some sort of informational message. If you have response code starting with 2, which means it was some sort of successful request. I mean that request got completed successfully in some way. Okay. If your response code starts with 3, it indicates that your request was redirected. If your status code starts with 4, which means you had some issues from the client end. And if your status code starts with 5, which means server end problem. Okay. So we should be aware about each and everything that I have just explained about HTTP. So if you really want to talk about the get message, then it's better to open up the RFC for HTTP get method. Okay. So now you can talk about HTTP get method. Right here, you can go through the RFC that we have here for HTTP get message, and it will explain you everything about the HTTP. And nobody in interviews will ask out from this RFC. Okay, this is really, it's everything actually about this protocol, especially about the get method. Okay. Similarly, you can open up this RFC basically contains every method, right? So it's the same RFC number, right? So within this RFC, you have everything here. Like if you search for get, you can see get message, right? And then also you could search for some other stuff. Like here you can see methods, transfer a current representation of the target resource. The meaning of head is same as get, but only transfer the status line and the header section. Post, perform request resource specific processing on the request payload. Replace all current representations of the target resource with the request payload. Delete, remove all current representations of the target resource. Connect, establish a tunnel to the server initiated by the target resource. options, trace, like that. These all are the methods, right? So we should read this RFC to understand HTTP in more and more details. That's the best way to understand the HTTP protocol. Similarly, you should read about FTP and others. So if I talk about, let's say, IMAP or maybe SMTP, so SMTP is there. So we should be 100% about the SMTP in OSI model. So SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and this page will explain you the purpose of SMTP, the uses of SMTP, protocol overview, right? And then it should also have its different messages, like from, to, CC, date, subject, like that. So that has that holistic information within the SMTP packets. Okay. And then also you can read about, you can also read the RFCs for SMTP, because SMTP is a open source technology or is a open source protocol. Okay. So that's that piece. Thereafter, you can also read about the FTP, which is also important to read about the FTP. Okay. Passive mode, active mode, right? Data types, file structure, data transfer modes, right? Like that. So that's about the FTP. So you should read everything about the FTP. So if you go through all application layer protocols in that much depth that I was talking about, then it will make your task easy to crack your 101 exam. It will really make it easy. You will not be, it will really become easy for you to crack that exam. So that's that. And today I'll cover only this stuff. So I have discussed about the OSI model, all of the protocols in the OSI model, right? We have covered TCP, UDP, we have covered IP header, we have covered HTTP, FTP at application layer, but you should read it as much as possible. In next class, I'll ask you a few questions around HTTP, FTP, just to test your knowledge. And again, I'm saying that I'm not covering each and everything. I'm not teaching you everything, because I'm also expecting something from your side. Even if you go back to this book doesn't explain you everything in details, right? Because this book expects that you are pretty aware with this technology. Okay. So if you have any questions around it, please go ahead and ask your questions. If not, then I'll just wind up this class now, and I'm gonna share this book with you. So do one thing, Arjun, please share your email ID with me in chat room. I'll email you this book. Arjun, please share your email ID. And Jagdish and Rahul, you already have this book with yourself. Okay.
Yes,
So you
sir.
can refer this book. Please read as much as possible about these protocols, especially the application layer protocols. Because being a network engineer, we are pretty much confident. We are pretty much comfortable with the network layer protocols and transport layer protocols and data link layer protocols. But usually we do not focus over application layer protocol. That shouldn't be. My email is its on way. You should receive this email soon.
सर जो आप क्लास ले रहे हो वीकडेज में वो यहाँ ऑफिस से ले रहे हैं?
Yes.
तो आ रहा है कोई, या अगर रिवीजन?
नहीं सर, गवर्नमेंट ने ही अभी अप्रूव नहीं किया ना, अलाउ भी नहीं किया गवर्नमेंट ने, तो स्टूडेंट्स आर नॉट अलाउड टू विजिट फिजिकली.
ओके ओके, ठीक है.
All right, guys, then I'll see you in next week and have a nice weekend ahead, right?
ओके
Have a
सर।
good rest of the day and bye for now.
बाय सर।
Okay.